Well, the name alone of the Circus of Objects Theater of Every Day is enough to get one interested in the events taking place at XQ's in the West End on Wednesday night. It's a collection of performers presenting a wide variety of works and attractions over the course of the evening, which begins at 7 o'clock. If you need more convincing, one of the performances combines film and live performance to create a piece called The Newcomer. This piece is the brainchild of Justin Baird-Larrivé, the artistic director of the Urban Shaman Gallery in the Exchange District. Justin joins us here on Classic 107 this morning. Hello to you.
Hey Nolan, thanks for having me.
Yo, thanks for taking the time. Let's back up to the more broad vision of what's happening at XQ's tomorrow night because that name alone is fantastic. What exactly is the Circus of Objects Theater of Every Day for maybe those who have not had the chance to interact with it before?
Well, Grant Guy has been in the performance scene in Winnipeg for decades. And he's a do-it-yourself kind of guy. So he I don't think he's ever applies for grants for anything that he does. It's always do it yourself in small venues. And the idea of the Circus of Objects is having a low barrier space for people to experiment with their performance art. So I'm not sure how long Grant's been doing this for, but he's been doing work like this in unconventional spaces. So Excuse is like a bar, right? And for a very long time. So we're gonna have a number of artists. Another co-worker of mine at Urban Shaman, Teo Pelmush, is performing with his partner Kristen Snowbird as well. And so they've been doing stuff with Grant for a while now. And yeah, this event lined up with our main event that we're holding this week called Fate Maison, which is in partnership with a group called Fate Maison in Montreal, who do tea party performances in people's homes. And so, Circus of Objects made a lot of sense to host this event in conjunction because it's also kind of in that unconventional location for performance art.
Sure. We'll get back to this collaboration for with La Fête Maison in just a second, but first to hear more about what you're contributing to the Circus of Objects Theater of Every Day. What is the premise behind The Newcomer?
Well, the CBC made this film about my grandmother in the 1950s. It was in 1951, and it was CBC Radio Canada, and they used to produce documentaries for TV. And this particular, it's kind of a dramatization. This dramatization was about people coming from the reserve into the city. So I'm from my family's from Peguis First Nation, and so the story focused. They did interviews with the actors who were in this film and talked about their lives and so they derived some of the information from the real stories of the people that they interviewed. So the story follows a brother and sister who come from Peguis into the city, and their vastly different experiences navigating city life in the 1950s. It was narrated by, he describes himself as like a social scientist, and I think his name was Fraser. Um, it's like two first names. I can't remember exactly his name, but it's a very assimilation narrative. There's some very racist dialogue in there, and it really fits what the federal government was doing in terms of assimilation policy at the time in the 1950s. And the documentary was meant to inform, white people living in the city of why are there, you know, indigenous people coming into the city, what's going on with them, and then also to inform indigenous people who are coming into the city what they could expect when they're there.
Mm.
Um, and so, the intentions were good, but
Yeah.
it reflects a lot of the policy decisions at the time in the 1950s of, forcing people out of the reserve using Indian Act policies, economic policies, um, like training programs, but also like the residential school system was kind of at its peak at that time in terms of the industrial school system model. And so yeah, it's a really intense film that I grew up watching, um, and kind of absorbed some of that information
Hmm.
and some of that dialogue. So this performance, The Newcomer, is an attempt to um, rewrite some of that dialogue, to reflect like our family's real story, and then also to heal from the impact of that dialogue, both for myself and for, other families who've, experienced the impact of assimilation, particularly at that time in the 1950s, and needing to leave the reserve, needing to enfranchise, so give up your status, and, distance, that generation had to distance themselves from their traditions, their way of life, um, and even if it was contemporary way of life like farming culture, same thing, they had to distance themselves from that, and the result was, um, our families got fragmented. They got
Hmm.
fragmented, and so many people experienced this, and this film really captured that this was something that everyone was going through who came to the city, and I
Hmm.
I wanted a way of healing that, and doing it in a really cathartic way, but also in kind of like a funny way as well, and
Hmm.
using humor as a way um to address the dark side of, what happened to our people. So
There's a lot to break down within all of that, Justin. But to go back to something you were talking about before, you mentioned that this is something that you watched growing up. This is something that you undoubtedly internalized as well. A lot of these sorts of narratives that were just sort of part of that sort of mainstream that's put out by the mass media. And I'm wondering, as you've been putting together this sort of response to this film, what's it been like to de-internalize is not the part of the English language as a word, but to say that like you've been trying to like excise sort of these things that you took in at a very young and impressionable age. What's that like to deal with those things as they resurface and readdress? And you mentioned that you're addressing those things through humor. I'd love to hear about that dynamic.
yeah. Well, you said the right word, excise. So it's actually an exorcism, and in the film, the original film was called The Newcomer, and it was referring to like indigenous folks coming from the reserve into the city as
Hmm.
newcomers, which is obviously an erasure narrative. And so I wanted to keep the title, but I'm referring to the newcomer as the the assimilation policies themselves of these organizations, the federal government training programs, those sort of things, and they're embodied in the film in this bowling ball that's kind of like like a malicious spirit that embodies the CBC. So the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation is embodied in this kind of animistic bowling ball that has a spirit and a life that kind
Hmm.
of takes over the characters in the film. And one of the, when I was a child and I would watch this film, it was a way of spending time with my grandma. So my grandma died when I was 3 years old, and she was like, along with my grandpa, like kind of my secondary caregiver. So my parents worked a lot, and I spent like pretty much half my time in my early childhood development at my grandparents' house. So the impact of my grandma dying was really really big on me. And this film is kind of helping me come to terms with that and understand what my grandma's life was like. And we know the impacts of colonization are really big. Like the health impacts are really big, and people's lifespans are shorter because of the stress, trauma, having to work more, and that generation had to work so hard, right, to establish themselves. And so the film was a way of working on this was a way of me understanding my grandma, but also like reflecting on that those times when I was a child when I would watch this film and spend time with her and the parts that I really liked about the movie. So there was a bowling scene where my auntie Gladys Bear Morin was in there, and they were bowling, and it was just a nice time to see them happy and smiling and
Sure.
spending time with them. And so I kind of latched onto that clip and built the whole movie off of this clip of this bowling scene. And in the movie it's kind of like this is what good Indians do. And so like the and I'm using the word Indian
Yeah.
because that's the still to this day the legal terminology to refer to First Nations in
Mm.
Canada, and at that time that was the terminology in the film. But yeah, it's like this is what good Indians do. They're bowling, they're spending time with friends, they're working hard in their office
Yeah.
jobs, and then the bad Indians are the ones who are going to the bar and drinking, and they're doing labor jobs and that sort of stuff. So I kind of took this idea of this bowling ball to capture like this narrative of assimilation and what you should be doing. But also we know what the impacts of that were, right? And people's lifespans are shortened. People lost culture. People's families got fragmented. So there's something sinister in this bowling ball. And so I used Blender, which is 3D software, and made like an animated 3D bowling ball that like appears throughout this film,
Mm.
um, to capture this kind of um, malevolent spirit that has these kind of good it has good intentions and evil intentions at the same time.
Sure.
So
So
yeah.
within all of that, so you've made this film a response to another film, but as we mentioned in the introduction, this is also just part of the Newcomer that will be shared at XQs as part of the Circus of Objects Theater of Every Day. There's also, I understand, like a live component to some
Yes,
of this.
yeah.
What does that look like on a pragmatic level to collaborate in a live sort of theater setting with film?
Well, the thing with Fate Maison and why we're bringing them here is because we want to grow the performance art scene in Winnipeg, and particularly with Urban Shaman's involvement, and grow the Indigenous performance art scene. So there's a lot of people who are doing new performances, just getting into performance in different environments that are a little bit more like safer spaces for performance. So low barrier, having like family around and it being more supportive. And so this was an opportunity for me to um learn how to do this. This will be my first performance really. And so yeah, like I am a filmmaker, so it's like I know how to do that, so I can build off of that into a performance. So I'll be wearing my grandmother's outfit. So we have her fur coat, her dress, earrings, and so I'll be my grandmother in the film. And it's kind of meant to show the intergenerational connection, right? Like, so the things that my grandma experienced are the same things that I experienced too, right? Um, and and by wearing her clothes, it's like a séance, right? Like I'm welcoming my grandmother into the space. I've been praying to her. I've been asking her for help during this, right? And so I'll have a bowling ball, and my mom's been helping me with everything and going out thrift shopping and getting all the vintage stuff that I need. And so I'll be polishing this bowling ball using doilies, and then rolling the bowling ball into a stack of wood. So there's another scene that I really liked in the film with the brother, and he's like stacking wood with a friend, and they're talking about, oh, what are we going to do about the Indian problem, right? And like looking at traditional labor as something that's not of value, right? So the exorcism will be like rolling the ball into this wood, and both kind of rolling that away, like rolling that assimilation narrative away, but also the metaphor of like what the policies wanted to do, what right was to destroy our traditional labor, destroy our family systems, and but recognizing that that didn't happen, like like as much as those policies wanted to destroy our way of life, our families took care of each other and supported each other and still managed to have good lives.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah,
There's so much again that I'm contemplating as you're describing this performance. You mentioned that this is perhaps a new sort of a wing on your artistry, this element of live performance, having been a filmmaker for a number of years. As you continue this exorcism that we were talking about, this sort of excision of this internalized sort of understanding of Indigenous peoples as portrayed by that documentary you saw with your grandmother all those years ago. What do you think that live performance will be able to do as you continue this excision that maybe filmmaking cannot?
I think that's where the humor comes in, because the film is really dark and the narrative is really dark, and it's hard to hear it. And I had to cut out a lot of the really intense stuff because I just didn't want to put people through that. And so what I want to do on stage is have a performance that's really whimsical and funny, and like I'm gonna be in drag, and in drag, like there's a strong aspect of like humor, right? It's empowerment, right, for yourself, but it's also there's a humor component as well. And so I'm really gonna try to like embody that in myself and think about my family's sense of humor as well. And I also like was watching Twin Peaks so much before this, like making this performance, and so there's a particular style of humor that David Lynch is really into, and so um, it's kind of like using that um, like humor around pacing, timing, and then yeah, like I think I have this trophy that I got when I was a kid that I always thought I was good at bowling. When I because I got this trophy, I was in this bowling club, and I looked at this picture later on, years and years later, at my parents' house, of me holding the trophy, and it said consolation prize on it,
Yeah.
which means you're in last place.
Right. You got the
So
participation trophy.
yeah, I got the participation trophy. So I lost the trophy, but my mom went out and got one. So at the end, I'm gonna like put on this medal, this bowling medal. I'm gonna have this trophy, and I'm gonna be so proud of myself for my bowling bowling performance at the end.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Oh
to
my
try
gosh.
and yeah.
Yeah, totally. This is just one element of the collaborations that are happening here in Winnipeg with the performing arts scene and La Fête Maison, this group out of Montreal that you've been talking about. And this is just one of the events also that is happening in conjunction with this organization. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how that collaboration is going to look and what other events Winnipeggers can look forward to as this collaboration continues this week.
Yeah, so we had a performance artist circle, Indigenous performance artist circle at Urban Chauvin, where we gathered with a number of Indigenous performers and people who wanted to be in performance art in Winnipeg, and talked about what the scene could look like. And then we have the event with Grant, the Circle of Objects, Circus of Objects, sorry. And then we have the main Fate Maison performance at La Maison d'Artistes, which is Thursday, July 10th from 6:30 to 9 p.m. And then there we're having Casey Adams, Jamie Black, Freya Olafson, Reza Rezai, Frederick Lyle Spence, Camille Valcourt, Sanat, and we'll be having tea and doing the performance around a tea table. And the idea is to have a space that's informal for performance, and an event that everyone can participate in. And the reason we wanted to have this event here, and support it as Urban Shaman, is because the performance scene, art scene, is growing in Winnipeg. There was a time where it was really big. Early on, when Urban Shaman was founded, it was founded by performance artists, right? So we wanted to try to grow that again and connect the people who are doing performance art with each other, have exposure to new artists. And it's really exciting. Fate Maison is a great group to work with and really good at connecting with new people, and we're excited to see what comes out of it.
Absolutely, as is the rest of Winnipeg's arts community, no doubt. The Circus of Objects Theatre of Every Day takes place at XQ's on Sargent Avenue in the West End on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. We'll have more information on this and Thursday night's event with La Fête Maison at our website, classic107.com, and on the Classic 107 app. Justin Bernard-Rivet, thank you so much for telling us more about these events, and all the best for the Newcomer.
Thank you so much.